This episode is brought to you by the iTnews State of Security 2026 report, featuring insights from CISOs and senior security leaders from across Australia. The report explores the key trends and challenges shaping cybersecurity this year, from AI governance and identity security to zero trust, XDR, and cyber resilience. Download your copy today to benchmark your organisation's security strategy against the rest of the industry. Thanks to our 2026 State of Security partners, Sumo Logic, Savient, Virtual IT Group, CoreView, Brennan, and Rubric for supporting this year's report. Visit itnews.com.au and search State of Security 2026 to download the report now. Hello and welcome to the IT News podcast. Our guest this fortnight is Australia Post's Executive General Manager of Enterprise Services, Michael McNamara. Join us as we unpack Australia Post's target state architecture and the progress of technology initiatives within the broader post-26 strategy. We also explore the structure of enterprise services, how teams are organised, and what it looks for in the organisations it partners with. I guess just to start with, maybe it'd be useful if you could just outline at a really high level what Australia Post's current technology strategy looks like. And I don't know how you want to define that, maybe in terms of some key pillars, or maybe to talk a little bit about the horizon that you're working towards.
The strategy that we are currently running at the moment is called P26, Post 26. That's an enterprise strategy. We've been running that for 4 years. So effectively, I came in and sort of inherited the early days of that. And when I came in, I did my assessment of the shop, as you would expect, and did my playback to the LT and to the board. And really, I called out 5 key areas of focus for us within enterprise services. First of all, we changed the name to Enterprise Services. I think that we wanted to be an enterprise thinker. We want to move away from the business silos and lead from the front in terms of creating an enterprise and breaking down some of the silos, which of course is what we do in technology. We break down the silos. So enterprise services is really important. But 5 things. 1, I had to get stability back on track. We had to bring that in. It was challenging first year from a stability perspective. I'll talk about that in a second with some of the key stats and figures. Secondly, the shop was very much a build shop. It had invested in tech heavily 15, 20 years ago. So had some, what you might call enterprise platforms, what we might recognize as enterprise platforms, ECC6, for example. Some of the older CRMs, early versions of Salesforce. I think we had 6 of them, but we'd heavily customized everything. We were sitting at about 700 odd apps. I wouldn't even call them apps. A lot of them were kind of custom built workflows. So we had to come up with something fundamentally different because the modernization of the business, we couldn't do that with what we had. We couldn't get change through the system quick enough. I shifted the organization to buy over build, noting that we would build for competitive advantage, but we would buy for commodity capabilities. Data foundations. We had a very rudimentary data capability in the organization. Of course, data is everything, and being able to create enterprise systems and platforms, we needed a sophisticated capability there. So we went about building and transforming our data foundations. Partnering was the other piece. We'd sort of largely been doing all of our change work in-house, which was quite a constraint, as you can imagine, bringing in the best skills, best talent, access to global capability in what's a very fast-moving technology environment at the moment. We needed to open our minds. And the way I like to think about it there is we were a big fish in a small pond in Australia. We actually needed to be a small fish in a big pond if we were going to learn. And so that was a really important way of framing and bringing tier 1 and tier 2 partners. We had over 180 different partners in the shop, and very, very difficult and fragmented, very difficult to manage from a procurement perspective, from a contract perspective, and also from an outcomes perspective. So we wanted to simplify that. And then the last item really was skills, capabilities, and talent, really focusing on where the enterprise services team was, where did we want to position ourselves in terms of our relationship with the business. So moving away from being a kind of order taker to much more of a strategic partner and helping guide the business on its modernization journey. So they were the 5 pillars of the strategy, and largely they've stayed intact. We're coming into a landing this year on Post 26. All of the key metrics have been landed for those 5 things, and we're setting ourselves towards new horizons now.
So basically, once Post 26 and the technology programs of work under Post 26 are delivered, then you'll look to the next horizon, and presumably that'll be aligned similarly to a Australia Post business strategy.
Yes. So I'm a technologist. Everything I do is in service of the business. And this is what the culture we try to create in technology is to support our businesses to be successful. And so really important that we focus on supporting the business strategy, and our technology strategy basically supercharges our business strategy. So those interlocks are really, really important. And we've shaped the operating model of enterprise services in that way, such as it's a domain model that we run, and we've moved to that. We have GMs that face directly into the business, and they're effectively mini CIOs in their own right. And of course, we've got core capabilities that sit beneath that: IT service management, cyber, those enterprise assets that you would expect to see. So the operating model works well, and I think largely it has supported the business to think differently about who they are and to get more creative about some of the technology solutions we bring to the table to support our change agenda.
Do the business and the technology strategies, do they share the same language or the same pillar structure, or are they
Yes.
two different
Yep.
things?
No, completely intertwined. Enterprise strategy, the boss was really clear on that. He wanted everything to be enterprise. And so while we might all have our own strategies, my peers, in different business units, they all roll up to what we call a strategy house. And the house is made up of various different pillars. And of course, technology is one of those key foundation pillars.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the evolution of the enterprise services function? Obviously, you mentioned that you changed the name, you changed the operating model, I guess, and
Yeah.
the way it was positioned as a functional unit or
Yeah.
operation within Australia Post. Do you want to just unpack a
Yeah,
little
sure.
bit of that?
Yeah, so as I said, we moved to an operating model that was directly faced into the business with some core shared services. So business alignment, so retail, what's called PPEX, which is Gary Starr's business, network ops, people and culture, corporate, and then of course enabling capabilities. So IT service management, cyber, some of those other core services. We wanted to bring in a fresh perspective on things. So we went to market for some of those new roles. We regraded some of those new roles. For me, it was about bringing maturity and experience into those teams. The size and scale of the ambition of the business under Paul and under the board, really, it's a huge modernization journey that we're on. And it was going to require a different set of skills within technology. Some real big thinkers, folks who really had the patience to stick with things through thick and thin, because as you know, with technology transformations, there's the ebbs and flows, right? So making sure that they would stay the course and that they had the skills and experience to stay calm under pressure. And that's largely what it's about. So I recruited some of those folks in, and we created a really solid enterprise services leadership team. You focused at the GM level and also at the head of layer as well. Really just bringing that strategic thinking to our business colleagues, bringing a different way of working and setting up some structures and foundations in place that would allow our businesses to get change through the shop significantly quicker.
And just pre-enterprise services, so I understand, was technology aligned to the different business areas that you mentioned, like people and culture and PPEX and retail? So was technology aligned to those specific areas, or were there shared services that already existed in the structure?
I think it was less formal. And I think the
Okay.
business boundaries were a bit more fluid in the way that those organizations were set up. As part of Post 26 and as part of the strategy, we tightened a lot of that up, and we tightened the enterprise operating model such that it was much clearer. The boundaries were clearer, and we could just get that much tighter alignment. And once we had that alignment in place, it then allowed us to set up core supporting services more cleanly, because now they've moved towards being enterprise capabilities instead of sort of bespoke shared services that went up in through the business lines. So we had to untangle some of that and move us to a much cleaner operating model. Once you're able to do that, take a step back, you can then start introducing your partners and a partner operating model to bring some of that thinking and that maturity to the table, because you're effectively setting up enterprise services. A single way of doing service management, for example. I mentioned the stability piece earlier. One of the biggest deliverables for us, and one of the biggest, most successful outcomes, in my opinion anyway, of the post 26 strategy was bringing stability back into the shop in terms of business hours of outage impacting our customers. It's in the 90th percentile in terms of change. Really, that's come down to standardizing around core methodologies for ITSM and SIAM, bringing discipline and bringing folks in that had a lot of experience with running a disciplined, tight shop from an engineering perspective. So running your cabs in a way that everybody felt accountable for the outcomes. Previously, we had some of the teams set up in a DevOps sort of way, and I'd say some of the discipline needed attention. We were able to bring in a new way of working, which focused on each individual who was supporting a change to be accountable for the impact of that change and see that right the way through the life cycle to production. Having folks in there that really could create solid leadership in those teams, and the importance of keeping the environment safe from a change perspective. Now, in the early days of the strategy, we were fighting fires quite a lot, which means that you can't take a step back and you don't have the opportunity to think strategically because you're trying to put out fires. By focusing on stability and focusing on really our cyber capability, it frees up all of that extra time for smart people to sit down and go, okay, right, where do we want to go here with this post-26 strategy? Who do we want to be when we grow up? How do we support our customers and communities better? That was a key pillar for us, and I think largely we'd sort of succeeded on that. Now, touch wood, of course, as you know, with stability in cyber, we never take anything for granted, but I think we've got really strong foundations in place now to sort of grow from.
And how is that supported? And particularly, how is it codified in terms of maybe CI/CD pipelines, or in terms of basically helping the organization to stick to that accountability and to track metrics that would contribute to a more stable or stabilized system?
What we've done is we've created centers of excellence where we can. It doesn't necessarily mean that we move the people, but we have a center of excellence for engineering, we have a center of excellence for architecture, a center of excellence for service management, a number of those. They're aligned to global best practice, and we've hired in folks who are the best at what they do in these spaces, and they bring that level of maturity with them. All of the engineers, for example, the engineering practice, line up around those standards. We've been really clear from the outset that that standardization piece was going to be super important to support a really strong foundation for growth for us, for sort of next generation capabilities. So when you think about things like the evolution of AI in the last couple of years, having strong foundations around data, data quality, we've got a COE for data, which is a data and AI council. And actually we federated that into the business units. As you know, for many years, data's been the responsibility of techos. But of course, half the time, yes, we can be responsible for it. We know how to store it. We know how to keep it secure. But we're not close enough to the customers to know what good quality looks like when it comes to data. So federating that and pushing it out to the business lines, again, as an example of how those COEs have started to take shape. We've set out some guidelines as to what good looks like. We then govern that centrally. And we've got a data and AI council who are responsible and curate business data and customer data, all aligned to the DAMA framework. So global best practice, bring it to the table, and then create a collective where we can discuss things like data quality and bring in tools like Calibra and other things to mature the environment and standardize across the board. That's one example. There are other examples of different COEs that we've got across the organization.
Just wondering, has stability been improved or impacted at all by some of the work that I presume you've done around the 700 workflows or applications? Presumably dropping down to single instances or consolidated instances, or removing some of those things and working to a more simplified estate would translate into a more stabilized outcome because there'll be less systems and less moving parts to be keeping track of.
Correct. Yeah. So we've got a great diagram we use. It's called the spaghetti diagram, which shows how complex our estate is. At the start of post 26, we had over 700 different systems. And I call them systems very loosely. Some were big platforms like ECC6, and others were sort of workflows. Over the course of the 4 years and the execution of this strategy, we've managed to get that down to about 400 from 700. Our target, I think, was 370. What's happened is, as we've gotten the trust of our business colleagues, they've started to volunteer a lot of their shadow IT capability. And that's a wonderful thing. But the number's gone back up again because now we've discovered all these new applications that the business has volunteered and said, look, since you're doing such a good job over here, could you come and help us with some of these other things? I just see that as a really positive step in the relationship between tech and the business. And it just means that we've got a trusted relationship now. Having said that, we do need to address them. We have a target state architecture. It's been endorsed by the board, and it's been endorsed by a third party as well through an independent assessment. And that'll move us from where we are now, about 420 different applications, to about 13 platform ecosystems. Most of these platforms will be known to you. We've gone with buy over build simply because it's the quickest way to get an outcome. So Salesforce, 5 instances of Salesforce down to 1. We've moved to Lightning, ServiceNow, with the latest instance of ServiceNow, and working with our partners across the board. SAP, ECC6, we've got a really solid SAP workforce. We're going to move that towards S4 for our ERP and the BTP environment. And then we partnered with Adobe for their Adobe Commerce capability and the Adobe AEM platform. So we've recently launched our refreshed web framework. We went to market with collectibles last year, and we've just launched our e-commerce report. You might have seen that recently profiled. That now is fully enabled on our AEM framework, and it also runs generative AI for querying across the top of it. So we've been able to now introduce AI and generative AI capabilities into customer-facing platforms as well. The modernization is by no means complete, and with something as ambitious as this, it probably needs 2 cycles of strategy. People say it takes 3 years. Actually, we know better. We've been around long enough because the business priorities and things change over time and things just take longer. So we'll probably 2 cycles of strategy. I think we'll get to our target state architecture. And in the meantime, we continue to land new capabilities. We continue to evolve our proposition. Our app still remains the jewel in the crown, and we'll continue to evolve that capability and make it a better experience for our customers.
Just wondering how the strategic partnering panel, which you've assembled, is supporting that activity. And also, just as a side to that, I'm just wondering, when you look at all the different types of partners that you're working with, if you could just give me a sense of what makes a truly exceptional one, and maybe if you've got an example of where a partner's really delivered for the organization.
The partner panel for us, and we took our time to get it right, it's been a game changer for us in terms of delivery and how we deliver. So it's given us access to flexible workforce. It's given access to top talent, global skills and capabilities. And as you know yourself, things are moving so quickly, particularly around AI, and particularly with some of the niche skills around some of the next gen SAP platforms. They're not readily available locally. And so having access to those skills and capabilities and being able to bring them into the programs when we need them has been a real game changer for us. So that's kind of the tier ones. Also, the tier ones bring to the table co-innovation. They're always willing to push the envelope with us. The account team, but the best people on that team, they're committed to Australia Post. Because I've worked in big tech shops, of course, you get to know some of these leaders in the industry. We travel and we meet their executive. And Paul then develops relationships. I develop relationships with those. And they get interested and they're curious about the Australia Post modernization journey. When you're in Australia, it's really useful to have those relationships with the top of the food chain. The innovation, sometimes it comes from the head office. You get someone who's interested in the Australia Post story at a headline level, at a global level, then they want to lean in, they want to support the account. You get executive sponsorship on the account. Of course, all that just helps the relationship run smoothly. And when you're doing transformations with partners and things don't always go right, well, we have those avenues then for escalation. We have folks on the steercos and it just helps everything move along nicely, which is good. So that's tier one. Tier two, we do have some local players that we use. We sort of largely have completed the tier one panel now, and we're halfway through creating a tier two panel. So we've got to get that number of suppliers down. So how do you differentiate what you give to a tier one versus a tier two, right? So tier ones will help us with large scale transformation programs, like for example, CXT, which is one of our jewels in the crown. And they want to move to more sophisticated contracts and move us more towards fixed outcomes rather than a T&M setup. Now, that requires a lot of change on the Australia Post side as well, because it's not something they're used to. They're used to running T&M. So when you set yourself up to support a fixed price outcome contract, you really need to know what you want. So requirements becomes really, really important, because if you got to go back and relitigate that halfway through, that can be a very expensive exercise. So we need to have skills and capabilities in the game there to be able to make sure that the contracts are set up fairly. With tier twos, we probably lean more on the tier twos when we're looking for niche capabilities. I mentioned buy over build. I said we would build for competitive advantage and we'd buy commodity capabilities. So an example of where we want to keep building is in our app space. Our app is one of the jewels in the crown that we've got from a tech perspective and one of our core assets for customer experience. With that, we do continue to build out that platform and make it fit for purpose. And we'll use local tier two teams that have been with us for quite a while and really understand our environment and the complexity of our environment. As we start to move towards our 13 platform ecosystems, you still have 400 odd applications you've got to deal with every time you make change. So all of that regression testing, all of that sort of legacy integration work is hugely complex. And so having tier two partners with us that have been with us for a while that understand that complexity and understands how those various different platforms are set up, that helps us hugely. So a combination of tier one and tier two. Tier one to push the envelope strategically, to give us a kind of global access to a workforce, set up outcome-based contracts, and then tier two to help us with some of the niche spaces and where we want to do build and need a more detailed understanding of how the architecture post is put together.
Maybe if you can just talk a little bit about the foundations that Australia Post has set up in the data domain, and also to just talk a little bit about what your aspirations or ambitions are in this space.
Again, skills, capabilities, and talent was really important in the data space, and we were very fragmented when we started on the post-26 journey. We had some talented people. We had a data scientist practice, but really it was not an enterprise capability. It wasn't an enterprise function. So we set about building that, and we had fragmented data warehouse environment. We built a brand new enterprise data platform that runs on Google, and it uses Vertex AI over the top of it. So that's now effectively our enterprise data store. We're busy cleaning up a lot of the legacy data warehousing environments. That's our core asset. Post 26 helped us refine that. We did a lot of work on data quality. As I said, we set up the Data and AI Council. We align ourselves to the DAMA framework. We've been pushing hard in the data space, all the while knowing that AI is coming. And of course, the big game changer for us all a couple of years ago, was it 3 years ago now, was the OpenAI piece, where we really got into generative AI. And we all had to get our heads around that very quickly. It's still moving at such a rapid pace. So what's been pleasing to see is in our choice of buy over build, the platforms, as we've landed them, have native AI capability in them. Now, we're not naive enough to think that that comes for free. There's a token economics question that needs to be answered, and that equation needs to be answered. Of course, we're working through that. But what I love about the native capability on those platforms, let's take Salesforce or SAP Joule, is that it happens organically on the platform. They change the capability. They might drop a new piece of functionality like with Copilot overnight. Then they give you a little widget that shows you how to use it. And all of a sudden you're off and running. And so people can learn every single day the tiny little steps that moves them, even though from a day-to-day perspective, they might not think it's evolving how they work or ways of working. But you add that up and compound it over 3 months, this fundamentally shifts how people work. But people don't realize it because it's a very human way to learn. And I just love that, right? Now, of course, we've got to wrap a commercial framework around that, and we'll do that. And in order to be able to hedge our bets there, we are building our own internal AI capabilities, our own AI engineers, the Jira platform, building that out. And so we will have the best of both worlds. One will be on platform and the other will be our own capability where we can work with some of the tier twos to build out some bespoke off-platform capabilities and fill in some of those niche gaps that the big platforms don't fill.
I was going to say that's probably the only area that I can imagine you would buck the buy versus build, is that you want some build capability around your AI.
Yes, we're not putting all our eggs in any one basket, I suppose, is the summary of our AI strategy. Also, one of my core philosophies of modernization of tech platforms is this business-led. And my colleagues sponsor the major transformation agendas. I co-sponsor, obviously, from a tech perspective, but where we don't want to be is that transformation's tech-led, because I don't think really we spend enough time thinking about what the tech can do for business operating models, next generation capabilities. You end up migrating the old business onto a new platform and you kind of lose the whole opportunity you've got to modernize the business. So that piece is really important. And so we've made AI a very federated thing. We've got a digital academy. We've basically launched a digital academy a couple of quarters ago. We've rolled out AI consistently across the entire business. So starting with the ELT, but we did business and tech people together at the same time. So this is now enterprise AI and AI for Australia Post, not just AI for tech or enterprise services. We've taken a much broader approach to this and educating our business on the art of the possible with AI platforms.
Is there anything else you want to get across or you think we've missed?
I'd leave you with this. What I love about this gig and working for Post is we as enterprise services get to architect a future, set a target state architecture, and also we get to deliver it. And now we're in the guts of actually getting it done and delivering it. I'm a delivery guy. I love to get stuff done. I like to be accountable. I like to finish what I start. I'm getting to do that. And I suppose that's what excites me most about next year, is actually landing some of these platforms, seeing it all come together and starting to extract ourselves from the spaghetti that's our legacy architecture.
That's the episode for this fortnight. Stay tuned for the next episode. And for all the latest headlines and happenings in Australian technology news, head over to itnews.com.au.